If you grew up in the 80s, there's a high chance that you have read Bunnicula, and then forgot about it until you watched this video. Bunnicula was released in 1979, and by the time I got into elementary school, it had sold over 3 million copies. Now, according to the 2006 reprint, it says it's sold over 8 million copies by now. Bunnicula is the story of Harold the dog, Chester the cat, and their new pet Bunnicula, who might be a vampire rabbit who is draining all the vegetables of their liquids. Now, Bunnicula was written by James Howie and Deborah Howie, a husband and wife writing team. Now, supposedly James and Deborah got the idea from Bunnicula from watching a lot of vampire movies together, and James's mother-in-law convinced them that they should turn their idea into a book. Now, since they've released this book, it has won over 10 Children's Choice Awards. Unfortunately, just a year after release, Deborah Howie died of cancer. The remaining books in the series were then published by James Howie. I'll go over the plot of the book briefly, then go over the 20 or so spin-offs just so you can see just how big of an empire this book series has become. And after that, I'll also show you the cartoon that was released, which makes a lot of changes to the story. Now, as the book begins, it starts with a 2-page prologue that is basically the publisher telling you how they got the manuscript from this book. A dog carried it to the guy's door, and then a letter within it that is written from the dog saying that these events are true. Now, it's just a way to build up a suspension of disbelief for small kids. We're then introduced to the family as they return home from the movies. The 4 people are Mom and Dad Monroe, yes, they have no names, as well as the children Toby and Pete. However, there is something else with Toby and Pete. The family says Tony sat on it in a movie theater, so they take it home. They now unwrapped the blanket, and there, in the center, was a tiny black and white rabbit, sitting in a shoebox filled with dirt. A piece of paper had been tied to its neck with a ribbon, and there were words on that paper. Chester is able to see that the dialect is from the Carpathian Mountain region, or Romanian. Mrs. Monroe decides to combine Bunny and Dracula because they were watching the Dracula movie in theaters. Though I don't know why you would take your young kids in elementary school to go see Dracula. Anyway, everyone is pleased and the story moves forward. Next, we're introduced to Chester the cat. Now, Harold the dog narrates this entire book, and now he goes into length about describing Chester and about how they are both not like normal animals, for no ordinary dog could be narrating this book, could they? Apparently Chester reads a lot of books, but how he does this without the family noticing, I'll never know. Every night, when the family is sleeping, Chester goes to the bookshelf, selects his midnight reading, and curls up on his favorite chair. Wow, you countered my question within less than 2 paragraphs. Well played, authors. Chester, while reading, sees Bunnicula move for the first time, and imagines that he sees a collar on his neck, and even eerie music playing, which just turns out to be the neighbor playing his violin. I don't know, at midnight for some reason. Just as he's about to admit that he was just seeing things, however, he turns and sees Bunnicula smiling. His lips paired in a hideous smile, and where a rabbit's buck teeth should have been, 2 little pointed fangs glistened. Days go by with Harold being all alone because Chester now sleeps during the day. He's very suspicious of Bunnicula and starts trying to catch him in the act of doing something. Bunnicula's sometimes awake when the kids want to play with him, but it's told that he barely even moves, until they just put him back in the cage and he falls asleep again. Now, however, one night, Chester, while trying to track Bunnicula, heard the refrigerator door close and saw a little bunny hop away from the kitchen. I don't know how a rabbit was supposed to open a refrigerator, but that's exactly what happens. The next day, the family finds a white tomato in the fridge, and no one can figure out where this white tomato came from. They cut it, and it's completely dried up. Chester notices 2 small bite marks. Chester tells Harold that Bunnicula is a vampire, and he does this by bringing him 2 things that look like 2 uniformed handkerchiefs. What are they? Chester smiled. Lettuce and carrots. White lettuce and carrots. I found them hidden behind his cage. The next morning, the family finds white vegetables everywhere. One of the boys thinks it's because of all the chemicals in their food. Chester, however, thinks he knows the truth and dons a towel around him to look like a cape so that the family can hopefully correlate vampire with food that turns white. However, all they say is, I think he must be cold, dear. Why don't you get his kitty sweater? When the family finally leaves, Chester takes more drastic action and places garlic all over the house. And when Harold wakes up, he hears a loud scream from Chester. But once he goes to the kitchen, he sees there, in the sink, lathered with soap, was the feline detective, yelling his head off. Chester, however, says that because no vegetables were whitened, that his garlic-proof house proves that Bunnicula is a vampire. And then he chooses to get a steak from the kitchen and bring it to Bunnicula. And this is where he starts to show his stupidity. Basically, Harold's like, what do you need a steak for? You can already guess the wordplay that's going to happen, right? Do I need to spell it out for you? Alright, let me read it for you. To destroy the vampire, and in his reign of terror, it is necessary to pound a sharp stake into the vampire's heart during daylight. Of course, all Harold says is, should I chew it and then tell you if it's a sharp stake? Well, it doesn't go as planned, as Mrs. Munro comes to see a stake crushing the bunny rabbit, and Harold full of water because Chester thought that throwing water from his water dish would melt the rabbit and hit the dog instead. I don't know, chaos, and the family thinks that Chester's gone crazy. Because of the disaster, Chester is forced to go outside for a week, but when he returns, something eerie happens. Bunnicula is starting to be weaker and weaker, and white fruit and vegetables no longer appear anymore. So what's happening? Harold finally sees Chester one night, standing in the path of the kitchen, and always wearing garlic and putting it across the floor so Bunnicula's trapped and starving. Harold tries to intervene. That little bunny never hurt anyone. All he's doing is eating his own way. What do you care if he drains a few vegetables? He's a vampire, Chester snarled. Today, vegetables. Tomorrow, the world! The next night, Harold grabs Bunnicula and carries him to the salad in the kitchen just at dusk to try to get him to eat before he dies. Chester pounces across the table and tries to end Bunnicula once and for all. However, this does not go as planned, and Chester decides to do the only thing he can think of, and that's bark very loud so that the family will intervene. That leads to them going to the vet, where they put Bunnicula on a liquid diet, and they think that Chester needs, get this, cat therapy. In the end, Bunnicula is now on his liquid diet forever because they see he likes it so much, but Chester sees this as a sign that he was right all along because no fruit turns white anymore. And the family just assumes that, hey, it must have just been the grocery we were shopping at, and since we switched groceries, it hasn't happened again. It all ends with Bunnicula cuddling up with Harold. He and Harold have become friends, and Chester, however, he's no longer obsessed with finding out if Bunnicula is a vampire, because now since he's been to cat therapy, he wants to find out about his inner kittenness. Yeah, I don't know either. Now in the story, you never actually see Bunnicula mystify out of the cage, you don't see him suck down on the fruit and drain it. All of the evidence is circumstantial. You could say he's a vampire rabbit, and he did all this until he got his liquid diet, but there's also evidence to support that just some crazy thing turned the fruit white, and just happened to turn away when they switched markets. It could have just all been in the mind of Chester because he read so much about vampires. There's evidence for both versions. Now, the comedy of the book is decent and funny for children, such as Harold thinking Bunnicula had gotten to Mr. Munro when he sees the shaving cream on his face, because, he's all white. And the story is pretty interesting. I remember as a kid, many of my friends thought this idea was funny and ridiculous, and yet we still all read it. Now, and it's exactly how the story treats it. The story doesn't really try to take itself too seriously. It is suggested for 6th grade and up as it details inside the book itself, and it's only 80 pages in about 12-point font, making it a quick and easy read for children. Now, there are 7 books in the core Bunnicula series. I only have the first one from when I was younger, and it's called Bunnicula, A Rabbit Tale of Mystery from 1979. Then there's Holiday Inn for 1982, Celery Stalks at Midnight for 1983, Nighty Nightmare in 1987, Return to Holiday Inn in 1993, Bunnicula Strikes Again in 1999, and Bunnicula Meets Alan Crow in 2006. Yeah, I know, Bunnicula still came out in 2006. That was only a few years ago. And no, Bunnicula hasn't stopped there. There are 5 Harold and Chester picture books from 1988 to 1993, which are just large books with pictures and only a sentence or 2 of dialogue on each page. Oddly enough, 3 of the 5 of these were made into a play adaptation. There is also a Bunnicula pop-up book which features an original story from 1994. And there's a spin-off book called Tales from the House of Bunnicula, which follows the dog that showed up in the Holiday Inn and Return to Holiday Inn novels. All of those are canine mysteries, where the dog and all his doggy friends go off and solve mysteries and save lives that the humans apparently are too stupid to solve themselves. All 6 of these novels were released from 2002 to 2003. After that, James went to creating 6 Bunnicula ready-to-read books. The first one is the original Bunnicula, rewritten for 3rd graders, and he also took the Harold and Chester picture books from the late 80s and changed those into more kiddish books for 3rd graders, and reformatted the whole art style so that it now looks more kiddish as opposed to the more realistic drawings from the late 80s. This wasn't all for Bunnicula. In 2004 there was a play adaptation. I know, right? And in 1982 they released a cartoon. Bunnicula hasn't had a new title since 2006, but wow. I never realized that there were this many things that were made from Bunnicula. All I thought there was 1 book and maybe a few sequels that I remember seeing as a kid that I just never got around to reading. Now, in the late 80s to the early 90s, there was a TV show called ABC's Weekend Special that lasted 17 years. It took children's books and adapted them into cartoons. Ironically, the Bunnicula episode was uploaded to YouTube the very month I started researching this. The cartoon is vastly different. I'm going to rush you through this, just so you can see how they destroyed it if you'd listened to my review earlier. Now, it starts with a food processing plant being closed because there are way too many accidents going on. I mean, someone's almost killed because this falls. Yeah, I don't know what this has to do with Bunnicula either. So anyway, because the plant's closed, Mr. Monroe loses his job. And, I don't know, the kids find Bunnicula near the plant, but now he's near a tree instead of a movie theater, and he's already named Bunnicula by the people that left the note there for him. The kids and the parents stop at their grocery store on the way home when they realize that Bunnicula is missing. This is what happens when they're inside.
Rabbit's still asleep? He's not asleep. He's gone.
We looked all over for that little rabbit until I found him atop a bin of tomatoes. At least I thought I did.
Get off those pumpkins. They're not safe.
That's the trouble with humans. They always tell you things too late.
How? They're coming this way. Don't announce it. Run!
Look what you kids have done. That dog of yours, I'll...
Yes, we get cartoon sound effects as well as cartoon waves of pumpkins flowing through the store.
Tell me again about the note. Tell me again.
We found it with the rabbit. It was in Romanian, and it said...
Romanian. Romania is where Transylvania is, and Transylvania's where Dracula is from.
I found this in the refrigerator. It's a tomato. But it's all white. And there's no juice left in it.
No juice in it. Like someone went into the refrigerator last night and sucked it all out. Like a vampire.
There are no such things as vampires, especially vampire rabbits.
Are you sure?
Gee, I hope so.
Anyway, just as the middle starts, you start to think that they're going to start following the book, and no, they're just with you. They're like, we got more original ideas to introduce. Just before they can do anything that takes place in the house, Bunnicula escapes. They chase him at night and find out he's draining vegetables around the town. Now, immediately, I don't know, there's an alarm. Someone has a red laser alarm in their house for burglars that steal his newspapers. So, I don't know what the hell kind of world these people live in. But anyway, they immediately jump to conclusions and say, oh my god, that looks like a bunny rabbit could have drained this. I was like, no, it's the writer forcing you to say that so they can progress the plot. Anyway, all of a sudden a mob forms and wants to kill Bunnicula because they think he's a vampire draining their... Oh my god, I can't even talk about this with a straight face. Anyway, so Chester and Harold take Bunnicula with them and hide away from the mob. Yeah, Chester, who wanted to kill him before in the book, is now helping Harold. And even though he was trying to prove it slightly earlier in this cartoon, him and Harold just instantly switched to heroes for no reason. And then they head out in a pipe that leads to the food plant. I'm already spending way too much time on this. Anyway, Bunnicula is separated from them, and this is what Bunnicula does.
Someone, I don't know who, had unlocked that door. When we looked out, all three wolves were trapped in a vat with a lid on it. And as for Bunnicula, he was right where we left him.
Yeah, we've already seen him drain fruit and mystified just that he doesn't do in the book. And here he is, freaking flying all over the place and levitating the wolves into a cage. And also, the wolves caused the accidents at the plant. I don't know where they were hiding when tons of people were working here. And how did they get up top to the roof to chew on some rope and then knock down this giant canister on people? I mean, did the wolves also fly? Anyway, the plant's reopened. Oh, and one thing that's stupid about this is Bunnicula apparently only gets his powers because a full moon happens in the background. I mean, did people forget that werewolves and vampires were not the same thing?
Those are the vegetables we bought the night we found Bunnicula.
That's right. And since that night, has either of you bothered to feed Bunnicula?
The poor bunny was probably so hungry, he left his box in search of vegetable juices for nourishment.
But why just the juice?
Because he's just a baby.
Well, that explains the white tomatoes.
What the f***? I mean, he says, oh, he's a baby. He was sucking on all the fruit. Oh my god, this is so stupid. You've never seen or heard of this thing before. And you're just like, yep, we just chalked this up because there's only less than 2 minutes left in the cartoon. Enjoy your forced resolution. And then Chester and Harold laugh that they could have ever thought that he was a real vampire, even though they have no idea how their lives were saved. And then you get Bunnicula showing his fangs and he winks at the camera. This cartoon sucks and is completely pointless. None of the charm from the book is even here. It's just going through the motions and butchering the entire book. 3 lines of dialogue that were from the book. However, in the book, the location only stays inside the living room and the kitchen and never leaves elsewhere. In the cartoon, they're like, hey, we've got a living room. Oh, we have some extra factory scenes from some other cartoon we did. Why don't we try to write that into the story? Bunnicula's drawn like a cartoon rabbit instead of a regular rabbit, like here on the books, in every book he's been drawn in. And I read and watched both of these as a kid, but I'm surprised that I never realized just how completely different the cartoon was from the book. I mean, maybe that just shows how we as kids don't pay attention to a lot of things. Well, if you want to watch this cartoon, just type in Bunnicula into the YouTube channel, and it'll be like one of the first things that shows up. But I wouldn't recommend it. Instead, I recommend you take this book and read it for you, your kids, and the kid in you. Okay, if anybody knows me, they know I love artichokes. They're like my favorite food of all time. And one of the books actually says, lock up your artichokes. Now, hold on a second. This is an artichoke leaf. Do you see how small this is? You put this in your mouth and you teeth it, and then you bite the end off. There is no physically possible way that a bunny rabbit or any kind of animal could stick their teeth into this without it going through to the other side. Now, I don't know how this could possibly be drained or why you should warn people about this. I mean, there's a middle that soaks up some water, but you'd have to have fangs that were like this long to reach that middle because artichoke is so big in the middle. Yeah, so anyway, discrepancy between a children's book. Yeah, I know. Ranting about absolutely nothing. Alright, just leave the internet and continue with your lives.
I don't want to give you nightmares. I don't want to make your dog hair stand on end, 'cause you're my friend, but you'd better beware, beware, beware of Bunnicula. Ah! He'll get us in the neck.
The neck.
The neck.
He'll get us in the neck.
They may not hear us holler,
So we better wear our collars.
or he'll get us in the neck.
I'm afraid.
Be afraid, be very afraid, 'cause he'll sink his teeth into you and you'll feel the blood go through you when he gets you in the neck.
You think Bunnicula is a...
Vampire, yes!
What's that thing?
What thing?
That thing there, on the table!
A white zucchini!
Holy cow!
I'm trying to figure out what this is.
It looks like a white tomato.
Don't be absurd. How could a white... you know, it does look like a white tomato.